Welcome to the Syncretism Society Virtual Academy. Today we are going to be talking about the sign of Capricorn, the 10th stage of the alchemical process. And we're going to be diving into the mysteries of the builder. Now, the operation of Capricorn, we're focused on building Solomon's temple within. And this process is related with fermentation, which is the chemical breakdown of a substance using heat or other microorganisms. The process of fermentation involves in the making of beer, wine, and liquor, in which sugars are converted to ethyl alcohol. So key word is converted. In the fermentation process, we attain to our original aspects of ourself. We would say that we separate and actually death to the old personality or persona and a revival or resurrection of the new. But new is actually your pure state, your true self. So it's wrong to say like a transformation occurs. It's better to say that at this point, the subject, which would be the spirit or the soul, is now subjugated in a way that it is now taken out of its shrouds, of what it's covered. The microorganisms have broken down all of the egos and the layers and the muck that is over the self. And now the self is, fermentationally speaking, has transformed or transmuted the physical body. Because of that spiritual nature has now incorporated itself into the human body on a level that there's an actual change that occurs on the physical level, but on the eternal level, no change occurs. We are eternally that being. So in this process of fermentation, we put to death the old personality, the egos, the old habits, the old ways of belief, the old self that we've recognized through these stages of alchemy. We've understood that we have a lot of defects within ourselves that we've observed, that we have times where we feel that we fall short of certain divine attributes that we should have. For example, if we end up having a lot of pride, or we could have arrogance or jealousy, or we could still have aspects of ourselves that are lustful or addictive behaviors. These are now at this point are being putrefied and destroyed. And from these ashes, the new personality resurrects from the ashes of the old. So the new spiritual being within the true self is able to shine forth through the physical body. Now, Saturn rules Capricorn, and that's a symbol of Earth, and our body and our skeletal system is ruled by Saturn. And when we incarnate into this womb of matter, we're given the opportunity to have this experience where the entropic Saturnian forces want to kind of pull us into matter. The spiritual forces want to come out. This is just metaphorically speaking, because the spirit in and of itself doesn't have a specific location. It just is in counter space. But figuratively speaking, these two, they basically come together without even touching. Spirit and matter come together in a way that they don't truly ever touch, but spirit has control over matter. Matter is the impersonal energy of the spirit. So in the fermentation, when we put to death the old self, the old habits, the old accusations, the old biases, the old programming that we've been given by society, in fermentation, our new self is resurrecting from the ashes. We are no longer following just any spiritual dogma or corporate, climbing the corporate ladder. We no longer find importance in consuming, just eating for entertainment, for example. Like at this point, you only feel like doing what is necessary and what is needed in the moment. You're no longer striving to have something with your ego's no longer striving to fulfill itself selfishly. You're becoming an actual selfless giving person. In this fermentation process, you've gone through a specific change. Now, I wanted to Well, before we get into the building of Solomon's temple, let's continue with the astrology side of it. So with Capricorn, we know that Capricorn is the goat, the builder, the mason, the inner mason within the mat. When we say mason, we're talking about the builder of the spiritual temple. Now there's three temples. There's the universal temple, the macrocosm, that's the universe. Then there's the temple here, the physical temple. And then there's the lower temple, which is basically like the physical representations or symbols of these two higher temples. Now the temple is built through meditation and the fermentation process. When we meditate and we go within and we start resurrecting Solomon's temple, that means that our inner life is now becoming of importance of our awareness, that we're casting our awareness and our consciousness not on the external, but on the internal world, the internal temple. We understand that there's a complete other half of this physical material that we have in front of us. The other half of it is within us, and we can explore that. We have to build this temple through the rising of the chrism, which is through good works, through faith and good works combined evenly, to have bhakti or devotion for God, to want to serve the humanity, serve God, serve others. That is in activating the inner giver within. And then we're also having faith that we are emanations of the Supreme Lord, which is existing outside of this material realm. And when these two combine, we begin to improve ourselves through our thought, our emotions, how we feel, not only what we do, like not just like becoming better at charity physically, like helping out around the neighborhood, that's physical, but also how we feel, our passions, our prejudices, our jealousies, or our biases, and then finally how we think, what our thoughts are, because maybe physically we're doing good, but in our minds we're still having a lot of arrogance or jealousy or anger. So we have to construct the three-pillar temple within by balancing these three forces. Now we come to the story of Hiram Abiff. Now, before we get into the symbolism, I'm going to read from Manly P. Hall's book, Secret Teachings of All Ages. And we're going to learn about the mysteries of Hiram Abiff. Then Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of the everlasting house and grand master of the lodge of Jerusalem, ascended the throne of his father David. He consecrated his life to the erection of a temple to God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend Hiram, king of Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulations and offers of assistance to the new ruler. Despite Hiram's lack of appreciation for the 20 cities of Galilee which Solomon presented to him upon the completion of the temple, the two monarchs remained the best of friends. Both were famous for their wit and wisdom, and they exchanged letters, each devised of puzzling questions to test the mentality and genuinity of the other. Solomon made an agreement with Hiram of Tyre, promising vast amounts of barley, wheat, corn, wine, and oil as wages for the masons and carpenters from Tyre, who were to assist the Jews in the erection of the temple. Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees which were made into rafts and floated down the sea to Joppa, which they were taken inland by Solomon's workmen to the temple site. Because of his great love for Solomon, Hiram of Tyre sent to the grand master of the Dionysitic architects, Hiram Abiff, a widow's son who had no equal among the craftsmen of earth. Hiram, which is CH. So there's Hiram and then there's Hiram. You put the CH here denoting the solar force, a widow's son. The son is born from the universal matter material, the woman, the divine mother. Hence, there's no father. Who had no equal among the craftsmen of the earth. Hiram is described as being a Tyrian by birth, but of Israelitish descent. The most cunning, skillful, and curious workman that ever lived. Those abilities were not confided to building alone, but extended to all kinds of work, whether in gold, silver, brass, or iron. Now, Hiram is the sun. It's an allegory for the sun or the Christic force. So we know that the sun is gold, which is superior. to these inferior metals that he works with. So whether gold, silver, brass, or iron. So of course, Hiram is the master of the metals, just as the sun would be. He is considered the grand architect, founder, designer, separately or together. He equally excelled. From his designs and under his direction, all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple and its several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished. Solomon appointed him in his absence to fill the chair as deputy grand master, and in his presence, senior grand warden, master of work, and general overseers of all artists, as well as those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, as those Hiram should now send. The Masonic legend of the building of Solomon's temple does not in every particular parallel the scriptural version, especially in those portions relating to Hiram Abiff. The legend of the master builder is the great allegory of masonry. It happens that this figurative story is grounded on the fact of personality mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. So there is Hiram is from the Old Testament, but this is just an allegory that's used to represent Hiram, which is the high ram, or Aries, the cerebrum, which resides in the higher mind. And it's known that Hiram is related to the force of the sun. That is the physical aspect. And then Solomon is the spiritual sun. And then they work to construct the three temples, the universal temple of the 12 zodiac and the sun. And then we have the temple within us, the temple built with no hammer or sword, which is the human body, as well as the spiritual astral body. So in the story, the Hiram architect is killed by the three ruffians. King Solomon, King Hiram, and Hiram Abiff, they represent wisdom, strength, and beauty. So these three are the highest aspects of the creator, which emanate from the Kether. And Kether, Chokwan, Banan, the top of the tree of life, are related to wisdom, strength, and beauty, which are the three supernal forces of the prime creator. The ruffians who kill Hiram, because Hiram constructs the temple of Solomon, which is the temple of man, because he's the sun. That sun dies in the winter, so Hiram is killed by the three ruffians. The ruffians in our microcosmic terms are thought, emotion, and action. Ill-willed, so inverted. So inverted thought, inverted heart, inverted action, which slay the spiritual higher mind, the cerebrum, Hiram Abiff, who's the builder of the temple. Now, it's interesting, the cerebrum is the first creation in the womb. The first thing that's created is the cerebral spinal system. So Aries is the first. It rules the cerebral spinal system. And Hiram's the architect of the body, and he's the architect of our body, as well as the sun being the architect of the universe above. So Hiram, as the master builders, divided his workmen into three groups, which were termed entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master masons. To each division, he gave certain passwords and signs. While all were classified according to they were all given the jobs they were capable of fulfilling. At last, three fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force Hiram to reveal them the password of the master's degree, knowing that Hiram always went into the unfinished sanctum at high noon to pray. So Hiram goes to the inner sanctum at high noon to pray. What does that mean? Meditation into the heart chakra, the revival of the heart. And when our heart's revived and we reach that state of Christ consciousness, or those feelings of the Christ within, we're all automatically tempted by the three: thought, emotion, and action, the three ruffians who plot to kill Hiram. So they meet up with him. And the names are Jubilee, Jubilo, and Jubilum, lay in wait for him, one at each of the main gates of the temple. So they're the 12 cardinal points, if you think about it. Hiram, about to leave the temple by the south gate, was suddenly confronted by Jubela, armed with 24-inch gauge, a gun. Upon Hiram's refusal to reveal the master's word, the ruffian struck him on the throat. Then there was one who was awaited him within a similar demand. Again, Hiram was silent, and the second assassin struck him on the breast with the square. Hiram thereupon staggered to the east gate, only to meet there by Jubileum, armed with a maul. When Hiram refused him the master's word, Jubileum struck the master between the eyes. So what do we have here? You're stuck in the heart. He's meditating on the sanctum. And then he's hit in different parts of his body. Finally, he's hit in the eyes with the mallet, just raising the consciousness to the pineal gland. Here he is struck, and Hiram fell dead. So that's when the spiritual nature, the chrism rises into that tomb or fornix. It lies dead or dormant for 3 days. So Hiram dies by the three ruffians. So the murderers sought to escape punishment for their crime by embarking for Ethiopia, but the port was closed. All three were finally captured, and after admitting their guilt, were duly executed. Parties of 3 were sent out by King Solomon, and they discovered the newly made grave marked by evergreen sprig. After the entered apprentices and the fellow craft had failed to resurrect their master from the dead, he was finally raised by the master mason with the strong grip of a lion's paw. So it took the lion's paw of not the first, so there was 3 attempts to resurrect him. The 3 attempts are when we try to apply our intellectual way to find out if, is life just an intellectual game? Is life just an emotional game? We jumble between these 2, but then the third is spiritual, the transcendental, the lion's paw. The lion represents the heart of truth, the awakened heart chakra. The third person resurrects him with the lion's grip, and he's resurrected. And that is the same story that, he's the sun. So Hiram is Aries, the sun in Aries. The sun builds the temple, which is the macrocosm, and the inner sun, or the spiritual Hiram within, builds the temple within the spiritual one, so that we have an inner spiritual life, because the kingdom of heaven's within. We're the temple built with no hammer or sword. And we need to build this temple so that we have an abiding place for God. Notice the eye of providence, the eye above. There's the sun and the moon, and then the eternal eye. Because the sun and the moon are the physical aspects. And then the top one would be Solomon. To the Christian Mason or mystic, Hiram represents the Christ who in 3 degrees raised the temple of his body from its earthly sepulture. His 3 murderers were Caesar's agents, the state, the church, and the incited populace, the mob. Here's like a worldly interpretation of those symbols. Thus considered Hiram becoming the higher nature of man, and the murderers are ignorance, superstition, and fear. So here Manly Pial explains that the 3 ruffians represent ignorance, superstition, and fear. The indwelling Christ can give expression to himself in the world only through man's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Right thinking, right feeling, and right action. These are the 3 gates through which Christ's power passes into the material world. They are to labor in the erection of the temple of the universal brotherhood. Ignorance, superstition, and fear are the 3 ruffians through whose agencies the spirit of good is murdered, and a false kingdom controlled by wrong thinking, wrong feeling, and wrong action established in its stead. So this beautiful allegory represents replacing our inverted thinking, feeling, and actions with higher thinking, higher feeling, and higher actions, so that Hiram doesn't die. Well, he does die in all of us just by physically incarnating. The sun dies when it sets. We set. But when Hiram dies, he puts to death the old personality, and the resurrected spirit rises within. And this is related to fermentation, because this is what changes that change. When grapes and wine and like grape juice actually becomes wine, the change is produced and wine has a different effect. Hence, Jesus turning water into wine, the allegory of fermentation, because Jesus is the master alchemist. The sun is the master alchemist. The spirit of the universe is the master alchemist. Hence, Hiram Abiff is Hiram, Aries, in the cerebrum, which is the abiding place of God. And as we know, the temple is in the brain, between our temples. Hiram is the cerebrum, the ram, which is the higher mind, which is capable. This is why Hiram was recruited by Solomon because he was the master, he was the builder, he was the master builder of all sciences, the master of bronze, silver, gold. He knew what he was doing. Hence, Hiram, the cerebrum, knows what it's doing. intuition, righteousness, courage all come from here. And then fear, loathing, and avarice that comes from the cerebellum. Now, from the secret teachings of all ages, Solomon's the personification of universal wisdom. The name Solomon may be divided into 3 syllables, Sol, Om, On, symbolizing his light, glory, and truth, collectively and respectively. The Temple of Solomon is therefore, first of all, the house of everlasting light, its earthly symbol being the temple of stone on the brow of Mount Moriah. According to the mystery teachings, there are 3 temples of Solomon, as there are 3 grand masters, 3 witnesses, and 3 tabernacles of transfiguration. The first temple is the grand house of the universe, the macrocosm, in the midst of which sits the sun upon his golden throne with the 12 signs of the zodiac, are the fellow craftsmen that gather around, or the apostles or the knights at the round table that gather around the glorious Krishna, the all-attractive one, Christ, the creator, which is just the sun is just a physical representation of that spiritual truth. So the 3 lights, the stellar, the solar, and the lunar, illuminate the cosmic temple, accompanied by his retinue of planets, moons, and asteroids. This divine King Solomon, whose glory no earthly monarch shall ever equal, passes in stately pomp down the avenues of space, whereas Hiram, or the firmament as we know, whereas Hiram represents the active physical light of the sun. So Hiram, the master architect, represents the active physical light of the sun. Solomon signifies its invisible but all-powerful spiritual and intellectual effulgency. So Solomon's like the spiritual nature, the invisible, while Hiram is the physical manifestation. And they both work together to create all of creation in this allegory. The second symbolic temple is the human body, the little house made in the image of the great universal house. Know ye not, asked the Apostle Paul, that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. Freemasonry within a temple of stone cannot be other than speculative, but Freemasonry within the living temple, the body, is operative. The human soul is built by the 3 master masons, personifying wisdom, love, and service. When constructed according to the law of life, the Spirit of God dwells in the holy place. So when we raise the chrism by practicing the 7 virtues and eliminating the 7 vices, this process naturally occurs where we are now built by the 3 master masons rather than killed by the 3 ruffians. And so the solar temple is the true everlasting house. The best informed Masonic writers have realized that Solomon's temple is a representation in miniature of the universal temple. So when we practice going against just our negative, selfish impulses, or that we start to want to get a bhakti or devotion for others and want to serve others on a heart level, and we think about it, we plan, how are we going to serve others? We feel inside of what are we going to do to serve others, and then we act on it. That is the 3 master masons. But the ruffians that killed Hiram, they're thinking wrong. So when we start thinking wrong or selfishly or against natural law, or when we start actually will produce feelings, then the emotions, destructive emotions, will lead to destructive actions. So we have to start with the mind, then the heart, the feelings, and then control these 3 aspects of our being. So to watch and become conscious, our inner King Solomon, our inner sun, cast illumination on these faculties. Hiram, the physical aspects, the reasoning that can put it together and carry out the actions of the Father within. So here we have another Christian Arjuna or Moses and Jehovah type of thing going on with that dual aspect of the hero. It's like the 2 heroes. So Mysteries of Hiram, there were 3 attempts to resurrect Hiram. The human body cannot raise through just physical means. The physical, the intellectual, and the spiritual elements are needed to rise Hiram Abiff, not one or the other, but all 3. So in that allegory, it took 3 different ones, not just the mind, not just the heart and feelings, not just physical action, but all 3, which when combined is spiritual, which is the 4th one. So according to Allegories of Hiram Abiff, Exoteric and Esoteric Philosophies, which is a PDF book on Google, these are some of the allegories that are represented by the story of Hiram Abiff, and he was the one that was told by King Solomon, him, Hiram, and Hiram Abiff, which are three characters which personify wisdom, beauty, and strength, or Kether, Chokmah, and Banah, or the three spiritual forces within, instruct Hiram to build the temple. They build the temple, the spiritual temple. Then he's invaded by the three ruffians who try to kill him. One tries to kill him and fails. Another one tries to kill him and fails, but then the third one gets him malaction. So the first one's mental, second one's emotions, then finally active, acting on those. And by acting on that, we put to death Hiram, which equals the higher mind, the cerebrum, the higher functions. And when it's put to death, our spiritual faculties shut off. But with the three spiritual masturbation, Solomon, Hiram, and Hiram, which symbolize strength, beauty, and greatness, strength, beauty, and wisdom, we're able to nullify those three negative qualities and resurrect Hiram Abiff, which is the resurrected new Christ within, or raising the chrism to the brain and activating the dormant spiritual faculties. So the real and actual death of a historical Hiram Abiff, legends of Osiris, so it relates to the Osiris myth, the allegory of the setting of the sun, of course. So when Hiram also is killed, it's symbolized as the setting of the sun, which happens every day. Also the expulsion of Adam from paradise, which means when our physical body incarnates into the physical realm. And when Noah enters the ark, when we enter the human body, when we enter into meditation, these allegories mean different things on different levels. So these things are all spiritual. We come in one way through initiation, we come out a changed man and woman. So when we go through the fermentation process, we're no longer just meditating because we're told to, or doing charitable acts because we're told to, or we're not just reading these, holy texts because we have to. We do them because it's who we are. It's who we, exactly what our spirit wants to do. And we try to find our purpose in life and then do it. So rather than thinking about it and feeling it, we're actually taking the Capricorn energy of fermentation and acting on it to build not only a spiritual temple within, but an outer physical temple, not an actual physical building. But what I mean by an outer physical temple is an outer manifestation of that inner spiritual ideal that we have. So a change within must occur. We have to put to death the old self for the new self to come about. We can't just fill old wine bottles with new wine. We have to have new bottles for new wine, just like the Master Jesus says. So that means we're thinking, feeling, and doing good things. And this is how we separate the sheep from the goat. The sheep are the higher mind and the goat, the lower animal nature. In fermentation, we begin to fully separate from our lower nature. This is not saying that Capricorns are bad or negative. This is talking about the force anagogically. Hiram, Aries is the top, while Capricorn is the goat, which is the lower animal nature. So the personality is disintegrated, which is represented by the goat, and replaced with the inner being, Hiram Abiff, which would be the ram. And then we have Jesus, the master shepherd. Look at these beings above as well. So Pan the goat represents this sexual force that descends from the three top Sephiroth of the tree of life and into our sexual organs, which is Yesod on the tree of life. I recommend everyone go to Google and type in the tree of life, Kabbalah, and take a look at the different, we have Kether, Chokmah, Banah on top, and Malkuth and Yesod. Yesod's the sexual organs, and here's the feet. Pan is the sexual forces that descend from the brain or the higher universe of Kether, because this is the macrocosm and this is the microcosm. This force descends into the sexual organs. So we see the solve and coagulate up and down. There's the descending force and the ascending force. Once it descends, it must ascend. And this represents by birth and decay. We have to put to decay and to putrefy our lower aspects and lower qualities, and then bring about and give birth to new spiritual internal qualities. And this is done naturally by following your inner consciousness, the inner Christ within, as well as at first we do have to take like the actual advice from spiritual masters before that taught us all this information, before we kind of start getting back that connection of understanding how to get all this information from within. And we do that by awakening our inner talents, by practicing these arts of living in harmony with nature. For example, it's not all about just doing spiritual practices. This life is spiritual in and of itself. We should be learning how to do the liberal arts. We should have music, astrology, understanding planets. We should have philosophy or understanding writing, to be able to write, to play music, to make poetry, to study herbalism or medicine, practicing different types of creative abilities, such as building wood or understanding how to use our hands to create. So there's lots of things that help the spiritual and mental, the intellectual growth of the man, that is aside from just meditation, charity, selfless service to humanity, and as well as overcoming our lower nature, which brings about some pain and sorrow to ourselves and others. So I want to say that King Solomon is in man. Solomon, first and foremost, is the sun, crowned and draped in purple, as the sun is in Aries. Purple is given to royalty because the sun is purple in the spring. The crown chakra is also purple or violet, as well as the highest color on the light spectrum. In the picture we see here of Solomon, we see that he is looking to the right side, where spring resides in the higher consciousness, the right hemisphere of the brain. The right brain is the feminine, receptive mind of man and is able to pick up on truths intuitively. When we cast our nets to the right, we are being receptive to messages from the superior dimensions and open to influence from higher realms to move into the right direction. He is seated between the two pillars of mercy and severity, or action and reception. One who thinks before one speaks, listens before one responds. This signifies how we must become depolarized from the antagonizing opposites. Solomon represents the wise consciousness in you, not the one that is jealous, not the one who is spiteful, confused, nor anxious, but the one who cast out these lower demons and are in the allegory of King Solomon. Because King Solomon was an initiate who was able to cast out lower entities. And we know that Aries is also the master exorcist, or the force that can repel. This signifies how we must become depolarized from the antagonizing opposites. This being represents and produces the higher consciousness that seeks understanding and wisdom and love. The Bible is layered with 7 ways of seeing each of the dramas. Physically speaking, the King Solomon represents the neocortex, or the cerebrum, the optic thalamus, the third eye, the higher faculties which are found in the brain of man. Notice he's draped in purple, representing the crown chakra. Jesus is also draped in purple, showing the sun in spring. In the picture above, he has discarded the false paradigms. So in the picture, as you can see, he has discarded the false paradigms and is working to understand the true truth, with his gaze casted to the right, which is the right hemisphere of the brain, in between the two pillars, which is severity and mercy. He's now rewriting and making his own detailed consciousness to live from a higher sense of purpose, or a paradigm that is more aligned with the universal laws. Above him, of course, is 12, the 12 zodiac, and the 12 cranial nerves corresponding to the 12 intelligences in you. This is not necessarily a historical man of the past in and of itself, but is the higher soul in you, which crystallized once one has become balanced and is raised above the mundane, carnal way of life and into the divine. One who has cast demons out of their own personal temple of Solomon, which is none other than the human body. Manly P. Hall states in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, Solomon, the spirit of universal illumination, mental, spiritual, moral, and physical, is personified in the king of an earthly nation. While a great ruler by that name may have built a temple, he who considers a story solely from its historical angle will never clear away the rubbish that covers up the secret vaults. The Temple of Solomon on the physical level is the human body and mind. From the celestial perspective, it is the vault of heaven and the solar orb that builds and forms all creation. Now, lastly, I'd like to follow up from Hermetic Masonry by Frank C. Higgins. And we're going to learn about the widow's son. The widow's son is Hiram Abiff. He's the mystery of the widow's son. We're going to find out why. No character in history could boast of such distinguished and ascendance as this remarkable personage is, who has been the central figure of the spiritual world to so many generations, of so many races stretching back into dawn, antedating the beginning of written records. To that extent, this pathetic figure still dominates the souls of men must be left to the individual student to determine. Our Masonic cognizance of such a figure is derived entirely from the biblical story of the planning and erection of King Solomon's temple at Jerusalem. Through the friendly cooperation between the neighborly monarchs of Israel and Tyre, our archaeological science added to an intelligent reading of scripture during recent years has added much knowledge possessed by mankind of actual conditions in those distant days. The story of the application of the kings of Israel to his cousin of Tyre for technical and material assistance in the construction of the temple of the Most High is today readily explained by the fact that many of the features embodied in the description of this temple that remain to us were common to the temples erected by the Phoenicians, not only by Tyre, Sidon, and Tarshish, and other coast cities about the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. The character employed in the mysteries of these ancient peoples was identically the same as the smiling babe who we represent as bowing his ways in the New Year greetings on January 1st, and departing a sour and forbidding old grandfather time the following December 31st. This character was common to all Semitic people, from the Tigris to the Mediterranean to the Egyptians. He was a personification of that which the Greek philosophers called the Logos, which meant the word or the builder, the active manifestation of deity that is forever busy renewing the face of the earth through its vegetable and animal life. The fertilization and fructifying principle operating principally through the medium of sex. A continually recurrent phenomenon of the year invested this character with the attributes of a god who was a vigorous youth at the vernal equinox, rose to power and glory at the summer solstice, was set upon and slain in the autumn months, and buried in the winter, rising from the dead. So, of course, the story represents the four aspects of our life. We have when we're babies in spring, then summer comes, we're adolescent, then winter when we're fall in like our older years, and then finally death in winter. But what happens after that? The sun is resurrected in spring as the Lamb of God. Hiram Abiff is resurrected. Even though the 3 seasons somewhat killed him, we still rise. We still have a life after this. We extend to the next dimension. We go to the next plateau, resurrected in this sulfur that helped ferment and create the new higher spiritual personality, which is now individualized and eternal. Now, of course, it varies, you can descend to a lower planet or a higher planet or a different realm. This is just the physical realm, and we need to transcend this to go back to the spiritual eternal realm. So, being reborn as an infant at the winter solstice, a perpetual round going on forever, the ancients could conceive of no reproduction except in terms of sex. And so it was always the male principle that fertilized and the female principle that received and nursed the germs of life, bringing them forth at the appointed time, able again to reproduce the unending life transmitted through them. So the Horus, the spirit of fertility represented by the position of the sun, and the zodiac sign, the ram, called Ammon, united with the virgin nature personified by the position of the earth and the sign of Virgo, goddess of the grain harvest, holding in her head the sheaf of wheat called by the Hebrews Shibboleth, in the midst of which glistens the brilliant star named Abib, now termed Spica Virginius, which gave its name to the month of Passover. The name Horus Ammon is the name is Hiram translated Hiram among the Phoenicians. In the Hebrew arrangement of the 12 sons of Jacob as the representatives of the 12 signs of the zodiac, the month of the ram falls to Reuben, which name is an acrostic word of words, Ben-Ur, or son of light, which is precisely the original meaning of the name Horus, son of light. Or, Aur, it means light. The sign of Virgo is represented by the tribe of Nephalati. In the old Semitic mystery dramas of the year, the father and son were identical. The fertile principle espoused the virgin nature and perished, leaving his consort a widow. But she brought forth the same fertile principle anew as a son, who would in due time become her husband. The characters were called Horus and Isis in Egypt, Bel and Ishtar in Babylonia, and Bel and Azotardi in Phoenicia, and are introduced into the gorgeous imagery of the building of King Solomon's temple as a Tyrian architect whose mother was a widow of the tribe of Nephalti. The gold, silver, and brass, the fine linen, and the scarlet, purple, and blue in which the celebrated artist was much an accomplished worker did not mean the material metals and colors that they seem at first glance. They were ancient imageries of the planetary influences and the elementary substances that served as the material basis of all manifested creation. Wow, what a beautiful allegory to comprehend on various different levels within. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this lesson of fermentation of Capricorn and the building of Solomon's temple within. And next time we'll be going into depth into more inner mysteries. Thank you so much. Have a good day.